Welcome to the Power Hour, Optometry's biggest and longest running show. I'm your host, Eugene Shatsman, and I'm very excited about today's guest. Ann Cooper is the Editorial Director of Vision Monday and 2020 magazine. And if you've been in this industry for more than 5 minutes, you've probably read something that her team's put out. Whether it's VMail, the industry calendar, their special newsletters, you name it. Honestly, not much happens in Eyecare without showing up somewhere in one of their publications. And so that's exactly why I wanted to have Ann on the show. She's got this very unique perch where for the last 18 or so months, she doesn't just kind of report on the news, she's in the news and she's analyzing the major trends. So in today's episode, we zoom way out and we talk about these meta trends that are shaping our industry. For example, what stories are resonating the most with their audience? What's surprising, even from her point of view? How are they using multiple mediums? And how do changes like technology adoption or scope expansion, or even the reshaping of our major meetings signal where the profession is headed? So if you go to practice, you work in a practice, or you just want to stay ahead of what's coming, this conversation will give you some thoughtful insights on what matters right now and what might be on the horizon. Quick reminder before we get started, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. And as always, I look forward to hearing from you. Drop me a line anytime at eugeneshatsman.com. And now let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Ann Cooper. Ann Cooper, welcome to the Power Hour. Excited to have you on the show.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Cooper. I am Editorial Director for Vision Monday and for 2020 magazine as well. I joined the organization in January of last year, so about a year and a half in. It's been really exciting so far to have a chance to be in this seat and really have a bird's eye view of the industry and get to know all the different moving parts and the different people and the different organizations. In terms of our publications, we have, again, both print and digital platforms for VM and for 2020. So a lot of people are familiar with VMail, which is our daily newsletter Monday to Friday, and then VMail Weekend is our Saturday edition. And through those platforms, we're reaching, tens upon tens of thousands of people every day, which when you really stop and think about it is a little bit mind-boggling to recognize how many people are actually opening up those emails every day and reading what our team is putting together. We also have 2020 in terms of their different newsletter platforms that go out promoting their website and the different newsletters promoting different features in the publication. VM has also the Going Green and Independent Eye newsletters that go out. We have an industry calendar that goes out on a regular basis as well. And of course, you can find us across social channels on LinkedIn, on Insta, on X. So we have significant presence across all those platforms as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, Ann, because quite frankly, I don't think anything happens in the industry without you guys somewhere in one of your publications or multiple reporting on it. And so that does give you a unique perch from which to, I guess, identify what is the kind of the meta trends, what are the meta trends, what is going on in the industry, where are things headed, what are some of the things that people respond to the most, what do people care about the most. So let's maybe zoom out first and say, if you had to summarize over the last 18 months or so what things look like, what are the things that people care about the most, your readers? What are the trends that appear to be at the top of the industry's mind?
That's a great question. I will say when I first started, I joked that there was a little bit of drinking from the fire hose, so to speak, in that I was out in front at different meetings and events and meeting people. And I had the opportunity to get on stage at the summit last year, our Vision Expo, our Vision Monday Executive Summit. And my observation at that time that still holds true today is that in our roles at Vision Monday in 2020, we are not just of the news, but we are in the news ourselves. We generate the news ourselves. We identify these trends. We report on these trends. And so we're in this unique position where we get to see the industry as it evolves, but we're also a part of it, and we're a partner to it. And so it's really a unique position to be in. Which reminds me, I didn't bring up our summit or our most influential women luncheon that are also key events for us as well as part of the offerings for VM in 2020. But back to your question, I think that there's a real thirst for information on technology, on the evolution of technology in the industry, the role of technology in the industry. And there's also a real curiosity about change. Change as part of any industry, whether it's optical or automotive or what have you. Change is inevitable. So when we're doing reporting on changes or significant changes, we do see a lot of interest in that as well.
Yeah, and I guess you mentioned technology. What other themes have emerged that kind of related to that change? Um,
Sure. Yeah, I think anything that delves into the use of artificial intelligence, when you think about the role of artificial intelligence and the role that it's playing kind of across the spectrum of the industry. So thinking about it, closer to home in the diagnostic capabilities, thinking about it within a practice from an operational efficiency standpoint, time with the patient, ease of use, facilitating more of the administrative or the operational side of running a practice or even running a business. And then when you extrapolate that outward and you look at how it's elevating access to care and the ability to deliver care in different locations, and using it as a tool to not just enhance diagnostic capability, but to enhance access. There's a tremendous interest in that technology, and that technology is going to continue to evolve. Scott Morris just wrote a really great column on this for AI and Eyecare, one of our products, where he talks through the evolution of AI and the role of change in our industry and our responsibilities as leaders in terms of helping to leverage that to move things forward. So there is a great interest in that technology and what it means. And I think we're continuing to see that. There's also a significant interest in wearable technology. We saw a lot of interest when we saw the approval come in for a Nuance Audio, and that groundbreaking technology that allowed there to be an open ear hearing solution for patients, and combining that in a pair of eyewear to allow some discrete solutions for people. It really was a big step forward, I think, in the industry that we saw a tremendous amount of interest in from our standpoint, from a readership standpoint, and a continued interest in that and the evolution of that sort of technology. And I think it all goes hand in hand, really, with what's the heart and soul of the industry is, and kind of having had, a year and a half or so here kind of under my belt, so to speak, I have seen that it's an industry with a lot of heart. And we have all different components that come together. We have clinicians, you have wholesale, retail, manufacturing, you have eyewear, you have lenses, you have labs, you have all of these different components coming together. And while each has a unique business or a unique, space in the industry, at the end of the day, the underlying goal that everybody has is to help people see through healthy eyes. And I think the desire to continue to do that well and to reach as many people as possible is what has driven a lot of this interest.
yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting as you're talking through it. I wonder if the adjacency component. So when you talk about hearing, that's a new adjacency. But of course, we've talked about dry eye and aesthetics. We talk about myopia management as a subspecialty, but I'd call it like an adjacency to the core comprehensive eye exam. It seems like there is constant ebbs and flows of popularity with some of that information. I kind of get a sense that there's a thirst for knowledge when a new adjacency comes on. So this whole hearing component, that was, when we did a hearing episode over a year ago. That episode got a ton of a ton of attention, and the reason why I think is because people are looking to say, how can we take care of the patient more holistically, and how can we integrate the fact that an optometrist sees, I don't know, 2,400 patients a year? How can we make that care more complete and offer a more comprehensive health experience for a patient, right?
And I think that that's a key point as well. And whether it is the expansion into myopia management or dry eye disease or any sort of diabetes related eye disease, of course, there's a multi-layered component to any sort of scope of practice expansion, but that underlying drive, there's an interest in helping as many patients as possible. How can we leverage technology as a tool to reach the right people and get care where it's needed? There's been a lot of information published, and it's not new information that the patient population is growing, it's aging. And with that comes the continued rise of age-related eye care needs, rather, and just a growing population in general with their own sets of needs. And I think that the industry as a whole is always, from my perspective, looking to find ways to get to patients where they are and to help broaden access so that people can get that care they need. And technology, it's come into focus, pardon the pun, as a really significant tool in making that happen.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little bit about AI, and I know there's a jobs and publication called AI and Eyecare, and I've had Scott on the show. I publish sometimes in that, publish a couple articles in that publication as well. But I also noticed that there's more mainstream AI solutions now being announced more than ever. What's your take on kind of the direction that this is headed, and how quickly or not quickly people are embracing the new technology?
You know, I think at our summit in 2024, Sam Jordan was one of our presenters, and she said it best. It's not that the technology will replace anyone; it's that people who use the technology will replace those who don't. And so I think the direction that it's going in is the continued evolution in a diagnostic space, the continued evolution in a practice management and business management space, finding more efficient ways to work and allowing your team members to really focus on the parts of their jobs that only they can do. And so I think where we're seeing the technology going is this continued evolution in utility, but also we're evolving with it to identify where we can plug this in as a tool so that we can continue to really deliver that high level of service and high level of care, and leverage that as a tool to help us all do our work better.
So I have to ask about this from an AI standpoint, because I imagine that, I guess for those of you who don't know, that in order to get something published on, VM, you have to send a press release, right? And
Yes.
so that press release has to come to you or a member of your team or somebody in that organization. And in the past, it used to be harder to write a press release than it is today. So I'm curious how bombarded you are from a technology assisted standpoint. Like now it seems like I, you know, everything can be really newsworthy, and it's a lot less effort, cost, and resources to write a press release about something newsworthy. So have you seen the number of press releases go up?
Not necessarily. I think that we always have a lot of interest in people sending us information and news to share. And the degree to which AI has contributed to that, or larger language models, I'm not really sure. On our end of it, there's always a human receiving it. There's definitely a human receiving it and reviewing it and assessing it. And from time to time, AI may be used to help and as a tool for us. But by and large, we generally have uh, editors on the receiving end of those releases taking a look at them. And there are releases that come in that have all the moving parts that we need: the who, what, where, when, and why. And then there are releases that come in sometimes that may have some different pieces where we'd like a little more information, and we follow up in those cases. But I don't know if there's been a broader proliferation of submissions to us. But I do think it has probably helped people in refining some of the ways that they write and communicate.
Yeah, and I'm just sort of curious, but I also recognize that the people who have newsworthy things are probably still taking the time and energy to make sure that those newsworthy things reach your desk one way or another. Um, and as you're getting these news releases, what's the process by which you decide, is this news or is this not news? I've always been curious about that.
And that's a great question. We're really lucky on the VM in 2020 side. We do have a lot of different vehicles and products and ways to cover the news, more so now than we ever have before. My kids like to think that when I went to journalism school, we were etching news stories onto a stone tablet with an ice
Of course.
pick.
Yep. Yep.
Not quite the case, but close. I did, have my upbringing in the journalism world when newspapers were the primary source of information. Um, and I think that now when things come in, we have so many different channels and so many different ways to consider where they would fit in the space, now more so than ever. I tell the team all the time, I mean, we have readership who all they want to do and what they were raised on from a native standpoint is print. They grew up getting a newspaper in their driveway, magazines in their mailbox, and how they read and digested their information and how they received their news was through print vehicles solely. I was one of them for a very long time. And then we have readers on the other end of that spectrum who are complete digital natives. I mean, I look at my own kids who are teens and tweens, and the bulk of the information they receive is from a news app on their phone, or different chat groups and things like that where there's an exchange of information. And so there's a lot of different avenues. Kind of getting back to your question, there's a lot of different avenues to publish news now, and there's a lot of different levers that we can pull. And so I think when things are happening, and when we know that there are things going on, we kind of look to see where it fits within the available platforms that we have. And there have been times where if we haven't identified an available platform, we think through one, and we come up with an avenue to get that news out in the best way possible based on the circumstances. And so I think it's kind of a mix of things, in terms of the newsworthiness of it, what it's covering, and thinking about the different platforms where it might be suitable. Something may be more of a LinkedIn post, or something on Insta. It might be a reel, or it may be a photo posted or a few photos posted on LinkedIn. It could be a Vmail story, or you could look to VM or 2020 for some more of like a lengthier piece or in-depth coverage, depending on the complexity of the topic. So there's a lot of things that we kind of think through when we get a press release. Some of it is a real great fit for Vmail, and other pieces may be more suited to some of our other platforms. And those are evaluations that are happening every day.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point, is that you think about the role of media, the role that media plays in the media consumer's life, and whether that consumer is a practice owner or an industry partner in your case, or really just could be a student who is trying to learn about the industry. But the reality is that you have lots of different ways to cater to them. and it's not sort of a single channel. So that actually makes a really complicated decision tree, huh? In terms of where does something go and why?
It does, but it doesn't in this sense that we're lucky to have a lot of levers to pull, and we're lucky to have a lot of different channels to explore. And it provides us a good deal of agility when news comes in to really talk through as a team, how does this make them, what's the best platform? What's the best avenue to get this out? And having those conversations around, is this a longer article? Is this a longer article with a short reel? Is this a longer article with a short LinkedIn post? And I think, if you told me 25 years ago, graduating from journalism school, that these would be the conversations we were having, we kind of laugh, right? Because back then there were the newspapers and magazines, and the internet was just kind of a thing that was just getting started. But it's an exciting time to be in the industry where you have so many different avenues to reach readers where they are.
Yeah.
I think a great thing about Jobson, as a team, is that we do have so many resources to pull from. We have our research group, we have Frames Data, so we have a tremendous amount of information that we can lean back on in kind of considering some of these different stories and identifying trends and things like that, and then identifying the appropriate channels for them.
And maybe a philosophical question, but as we were talking about AI, it kind of immediately spurred the question in my mind is that I is there a world in which in the future your reader interacts with an AI platform rather than interacts with, Vmail coming into their inbox? And how are you guys preparing for that?
That's a great question too, and I don't know if we're there yet. I don't know if we're there yet, and it's something to consider, of course, as we continue to look toward the evolution of the product and what role AI will have in allowing us to continue to reach the readers where we are. I mean, those are conversations as a publishing organization and a news organization that we're having almost daily. Is ensuring that we're identifying where the readers are, and we're meeting them there, and kind of getting back to that breadth. We have readers who, as digital natives, an appetite may be more for a video, right? An appetite may be more for a 300 or 400 word, few paragraphs versus your great read. That might be something that's more of the length you find in like a New York Times magazine. So that question around AI and where that fits, it's all part of the conversations that we're having as we continue to look at ways that we can keep meeting the readers where they are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've read about organizations thinking about how you truly personalize the media to the consumer. And
Mm-hmm.
there may be somebody who has no time and says, "Hey, summarize the last week's news for me in in under a minute," and
Mm-hmm.
then something that could be a digital tool that quickly summarizes the news for that person and provides them with the hits and highlights. And then there may be somebody, like you said, who wants kind of the in-depth thing, and then basically asks and says, "Okay, tell me more about this particular topic," and then the we'll call it the agent pulls together a very specific type of experience that ultimately engages that media consumer that way. But this is, I mean, this is all obviously in the future. But as we start thinking about this massive repository of information that you guys are managing every single day, the second that you started talking about multiple channels, it seems like you're trying to customize the experience for the user, and you're doing a great job with the channels that you have available now. And in the future, I start thinking about, like, if AI is the thing that ultimately we all interact with on a daily basis because it's made our lives better and more efficient, could that AI potentially, in some way, shape, or form, drive the consumption of this massive amount of content that you all have?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that there's a possibility for that. I think that that's a direction that may come to pass at some point. But I mean, what we're seeing now, and I think that the key with AI is ensuring that we're tapping into it as a useful tool. Um, and whether you are kind of approaching it from the perspective of a patient, or approaching it from the perspective of a news organization, or approaching it from the perspective of a business, is to identify where that comes into play as a tool in your organization, and how can your people leverage that tool and be trained in it to really maximize on delivering on the goals and missions for each organization, and for the industry. And I think that it's as unique a question as can be, based on the number of different businesses, practices, and different outlets we have within the industry.
And I think, looking for those gaps where, or maybe those opportunities where new technology can help make, if you're a practice owner, your patient experience better, or if you're not a
Yes.
practice owner but an industry member, your customer or client experience better, and at the same time possibly save you money,
Right.
making the lives of your team easier and better, and then possibly generate more revenue because it more intelligently caters to the needs of your end user. Like those three things, to me, that's kind of the golden triangle of success for technology adoption. If you can find that, then do that, because in some cases, I think a lot of people have been a little bit disillusioned because AI was supposed to be this whole, you know, solve all your problems magic thing. And they tried it and it didn't quite work out the way that they wanted to. And so they were like, yeah, well, it's probably not now and not for now. But that's standard with any new technology that comes out. So I like what you're saying, which is, start looking for the opportunities, and as you refine those opportunities, it creates you identify the need, and then you start driving, looking for solutions to solve that problem.
Right. And I think it also, points a little bit to a bigger conversation around the acceptance of change
Right.
and the management of change. And now it's AI, right? And several years ago, a lot of us were managing and sorting out how to manage through, you know, a massive health crisis, and trying to sort through how to adapt and change our businesses, our ways of working, our personal lives, our family lives, to manage through a health crisis. It could be, more global economic challenges. It could be technology challenges. And I think the thread that kind of weaves its way through all of these conversations is change. And change is inevitable. It's a part of life. It's a part of business. And I think AI is one of those things. It's a seismic change, right? It's not kind of one of the smaller changes that we may need to adapt to, like a computer shut down, or your VPN isn't working or something like that. I mean, it's a seismic shift in how we all work. But we can, I think, as leaders and as managers and people within the industry, continue to help move the industry forward by laying the groundwork now with teams, and helping them to become more comfortable with change, and recognize that change is a part of how we work.
And on that
And
on that theme of change, after we come back from the break, I want to go back to kind of some of the data and see where change is most exciting or most interesting to your readers. We'll come back and talk a little bit about what types of changes are getting the most amount of attention. We'll be right back in the Power Hour. All right, we're back in the Power Hour with Ann Cooper. And before the break, we kind of went down this topic of change and embracing change. And it kind of hit me as you were saying it, that the reality is that your mediums or your media that you manage is kind of an indicator of what changes people really want to read about, and whether it's because they're scared about it, or because they're interested in adopting it, or because they're super curious. But there obviously have had to be some major changes besides, technology stuff we've already talked about. So maybe we can zoom into some of the categories that that your publications really talk about a lot, whether it's merchandising or industry events or anything like that. And like, let's hit on a couple changes. Where do you want to start?
I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing right now is a curiosity in how the industry is reshaping from a meeting and event standpoint. So I know that you had a guest on from Vision Council a while back, and what we've seen is the Vision Council, programming change, RX programming change around Expo, has driven a significant amount of interest in the industry and a significant amount of discussion and debate. It's gotten really to the core, I think, of who we are and who we want to be. You know, Again, kind of not to date myself, but years ago, attending a trade event, I mean, we were on the floor, we were in suits, we were in heels, and kind of walking around the thin carpet of McCormick Place or the Javits Center. And thankfully, we've kind of evolved to all be in, to be in a more comfortable space. But trade events were the thing to do. And now we're seeing, and it may be due to that, we talked a little bit about some of the seismic shifts, with COVID and the seismic impact that have had on all of us in all different ways, and seeing how it impacted travel patterns, seeing how it impacted people's desires to gather together in spaces. And for some, as we moved out of the initial kind of heavy moments of COVID into now, I think we see that there are people who just want more than anything to be around other people.
Yeah.
It's more of a motivator to travel. It's more of a motivator to shake hands. It's more of a motivator to be in the booths and walk the floors and have those conversations, meet for coffee, and do all those things that historically at trade events we were all doing.
Yeah.
And having been in the dental space many years ago, in the trade publication space, that was what we did. I mean, 8 to 10 times a year, just on the road. And so I think getting back to your question about, change and things like that, I think there's a huge curiosity right now in terms of this programming change that we're seeing for 2026. And what is that, what does that say? And so many people have, feelings and opinions about it. And there are, those in the industry who think that it's long overdue and this kind of coalescence around one singular meeting is just the way to go. There are others who don't feel that way. And I think that from, our standpoint, in terms of the publications, this is where the industry is. And of course, we need to be agile and we need to adapt. So I think there's a tremendous amount of curiosity when we broke that story in VMail. It was almost like it was the equivalent of breaking our internet. I mean, the readership on those stories went through the roof, because there is a significant interest, not just in the logistics of the programming change and thinking about all the events that have grown up around these two events, but also what is it saying about us? What is it saying about us as humans, about our desire to be in the same spaces and the same places, and changes in shopping patterns, changes in buying patterns, selling patterns. I mean, there's so much wrapped up in that shift that I think everyone is still digesting and processing.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear more about your take on the discussion because it sounds like you outlined the two kind of broad things. So one person said, "Well, okay, that it's been going that way. We keep buying. We're more comfortable with a virtual demo of a piece of equipment or something like that. We're more comfortable learning about something through a Zoom meeting than we are in person." And then there's the other group that says, I still want to travel. I want to go to events. I enjoy the interactions that happen at events. I enjoy the learning, the curiosity that gets fulfilled at events. So give me more on the discussion that you've been observing.
I think it comes down to what people are looking for, and there's so many different stakeholders when you look at a trade event. It's not just the exhibitors or the attendee. There's an educational component to it. There are thought leader components to it. There is the dissemination of information, news. There are, the presentations, awards, fundraisers, and all of these different moving parts that are, I think, part and parcel of the event. And so it's hard to capture, I think, any one real dominating mindset, because I think that there's so many different people who are impacted in so many different ways by this sort of decision.
Well, and
And
you're absolutely right, because I think that there's the primary conference, but then there's also like all the conferences before the conference. Like, for example, at this Vision Expo, I personally am speaking at two conferences before the conference, right? And so those conferences would have not happened if everyone wasn't gathering at Vision Expo in Vegas. So I bet those two separate conferences would not be tacked on, so to speak, the day before if it wasn't for the for the fact that there was a main Vision Expo in Vegas. So now all of those pre-events have now been reduced to once a year. But what does that mean for all of those other stakeholders, right? And I get your point completely, because it's now forcing other people to say, well, what does that mean for us as an organization? What does that mean for our group, right? Whether it's a digital group that gets to meet face to face. I know there's several masterminds or study groups that meet face to face. There's several online social groups that meet face to face at expos. I know, but then there's also like the formal things like buying groups and alliances and things, um, and they get a chance to kind of tack their event on. So now they have to make a decision and say, are we strong enough without a second expo to create a second event, or should we be rethinking the overall picture of our event? So I totally agree with you. This was the thing that shook, and then all the ripple effects continue to proliferate people, and maybe in a really good way to ask the question of what does our end user audience, whoever we're trying to serve with a particular event, really want? And
right,
at least my impression right now is that there's actually more events scheduled for 2026 at this exact moment, but they're more deliberate and some of them are smaller. And it seems like those events are, and maybe there's a willingness to travel, but willingness to travel with a very specific purpose. I know why I'm going to this thing, whether it's to get CE or to learn about this particular topic or to get more information about, or to get some specific training. But I know why I'm going to this event. And so I'm going to go to that event for that purpose and network with the people who are expert in that particular topic, rather than, I just have this on my calendar because I always go and hopefully there's something there that interests me.
right. And I think, and we mentioned this before the break, is that the the key component to that question again becomes change, right? And resiliency and agility. And there have been a lot of different events and happenings and things that have built up around these two different poles, and when our September issue comes out, I do address this a little bit in my editor's note, and talk a little bit about how accustomed we've all gotten to kind of having what I call the East versus West, right? The city versus kind of the desert and the sun, and the opposite poles, fall versus spring. And we've kind of gotten used to these rhythms and the pendulum swing year after year. And the reality is that things do change. And so it just becomes a question then of how do we adapt to it? And it's a question for all of us. It's a question for all of us. And how do we, as an industry, say, okay, not will we, but how? Because it isn't a will. I mean, it's a situation that, like a lot of things as change occurs, we can fight it or we can embrace it. And I think one of the things that I've seen emerge in some of the conversations, and this happens with any sort of change, is there's kind of the folks who are seeing kind of the downsides and the bad, and it's going to be difficult and it's going to be this, or the people who take a look at it and say, okay, well, what this is going to do now is put different opportunities in front of us, or it's going to really kind of allow us to think differently about how we approach X or how we do Y. It'll open up different doors or different spaces or different opportunities. And, as we kind of move through next year and kind of move through a space where that change is happening, I think it's important to keep that, perspective in mind. Change is inevitable, and it's more kind of, do we have the agility in our thinking, the resiliency in our approaches to accept that this is the next evolution, and to really sort through how to accomplish what's needed for the industry within the space that's there, and where do we create different spaces or different platforms or different opportunities or enhancements or other ways of accomplishing the things we need to accomplish. And I think that is kind of the broader talking point when we look at a change like this, is that ability to adapt and to be agile and continue to embrace kind of everything the industry is offering and how we maximize on that.
Yeah, and I think this also kind of has a really interesting opening for creating conversations that are truly highly relevant to the audience that they serve. So if there is, now that there is no big conference, maybe there's a small conference that wants to fill a void for a small group of people that have a hyper specialized thing, and they might be able to find that find that conversation. But this kind of brings back the earlier point of our conversation before, which is that technology does allow us to super specialize at this point in our interests. And we have to be really, my personal opinion is that we have to be really, really careful with it, because we don't want to be in an echo chamber to say, well, I'm good at this, so I'm only going to pay attention to this thing. It's the good thing about getting a physical newspaper dropped on your driveway every single day is that you still have to flip, even if you only want to read the sports section because that still interests you the most. You still have to flip through the front page of all the news, and you're kind of aware of what's going on in the world, and you might pass the opinion page, and something will catch your eye as you're on your way to whatever you normally pay attention to. And I think, as consumers, we also have to be really careful to say, we don't just want to surround ourselves with people who are exactly like us. We want to be able to learn from people who are super different than us, which is where, there's the other side of that pendulum, which is that, yes, there is an opportunity to really talk to the people that you really want to talk about or talk to, but there's also the diversity of thought that you may want to be exposed to at some things where you don't necessarily have a very specific purpose in showing up or to the conversation.
100%. And I think that's part of the joy and the beauty of all being together, right?
Right.
Is you don't necessarily get to self-select.
Yeah, and as we kind of, I'm looking at the time, and we probably could talk about this for hours and hours, but I have been curious. You've been in this role for 18 months or more, and the truth is that you've probably gotten exposure to things that have surprised you, both probably in a good way and a bad way. Talk about a few of those surprises. What's kind of been some of the more exciting surprises, and then also some things that you're like, hey, I wish this would have been this way, but turned out to be completely different.
Sure. You know, I think when I first came into the role, and again, I kind of joked earlier in this segment about kind of drinking from the fire hose and running to different meetings and events and meeting different people. And my initial takeaway was really that it's an industry full of people who care. It's at the end of the day, we're all kind of driven by this noble mission to help people see. And I think as time has evolved, and I've come to learn more about the different moving parts and the different facets of the industry, I've come to really develop a better understanding of the depth of it. And if we talk about something that I think was a little bit surprising at first. I think from when I first walked in the door, let's say day 2, to where we are now, that there's a tremendous level of depth in the industry and complexity to it, that I think as an outsider, as somebody who had never been really focused on optical before coming into this space, there's a layer of there is a complexity to it that I think as an outsider, somebody may not necessarily understand. And with a background initially, I mean, many years ago now, as an investigative journalist, moving into healthcare publishing and dental, and then navigating into different types of healthcare spaces, whether it was through clinical publications and in medical journals, or working more on training materials in the pharmaceutical industry. You know, you come into optical, and there's a different feeling here. I keep saying it, there's a very noble drive to the work that's being done. And there's a very purposeful drive. And it's different than anything I've seen across any real discipline. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing, because within the industry, this noble drive to help people see has allowed all of these different people and all of these different players with all of these different moving parts to still come together in partnership day in and day out. And a big learning for me was, I think there were some layers to that. One was really recognizing the depth of the industry, the complexity of the industry, the number of different facets of the industry. When you think about all of the different moving parts and things that hold the industry together, then recognize that to some degree there are, and to I think a significant degree, there are, people who compete with each other. There's businesses who compete with each other to some degree, but at the end of the day, those same businesses will put whatever that kind of competition is aside and come together in partnership to support a cause or to help each other or to help a patient. And yes, when all that's done, they'll go back to their corners and run their businesses and their shops and the things that keep the lights on every day. And they should. But they also have this really unique ability to put that to the side for the purpose of achieving the mission of the industry as a whole. And you don't find that everywhere. It's a key driving factor that, even as I talk about it, sometimes I get chills, because you feel it in your veins. It's what drives everybody to do the work that they do. And it's a very uniting force.
Yeah, I think that's really, really well put. And you're spot on in the context of, whether it's an event, whether it's a cause, whether it's even just a collaboration on an innovation. I've personally been witness to competitors coming together and setting aside that competition and saying, okay, what's the right thing to do here? And you're absolutely right. I don't think that, I think everybody believes that eye care is big enough as an industry, and that there's enough of a patient need that everyone can find their spot in the pie. And if we can just make the pie bigger, then everybody can have a bigger slice of the pie, rather than trying to compete for the same crumbs type of thing.
Yeah. And I think, again, not to self-promote too much, but I think also, coming into the Jobson team and the Jobson Optical Group, it's just such a tremendous group of people doing tremendous work. People who really care about each other, people who really care about the industry. And it's great to come into an environment where you have that. And, I've been out in the workforce long enough to know that you don't always find that. And it's really something to move into a space with the team at Jobson and to see the passion that they bring to their work, their sense of ownership for the work that they do, and a sense of purpose. A sense of purpose and drive, and a real sense of obligation to the industry and our readers, to do the good work that we do every day. And I, like I said, I know enough to know that that's not always the case, and you don't always find that as much as we'd like to. And so it's really been a wonderful experience internally as well, to be part of this group and to be working with this group of people.
Yeah, and I think you guys do really important work. So thank you for keeping the lights on in the news organization of the industry. So and very much appreciate your contribution and your time today on the Power Hour. And again, to you and your team, we really do appreciate the work that you do and the ability to keep an eye on the horizon of the industry and a finger on the pulse of what's happening today.
Thank you, Eugene. It's been a pleasure.